Welcome, late-night listener. I know you tune in as the world settles, letting these true crime stories pull you into their depths. I carefully select each one, hoping it grips you long before sleep claims you. If these stories resonate, if they keep you company through the quiet hours, then like, share, and subscribe. Join our family, and let's unravel the night's mysteries together. Story 1, The Shattered Vows, was the most anticipated wedding day in Adam's life. The sun was shining, the guests were gathering, and in just a few hours, he would marry the woman who had captured his heart. But as Adam stood waiting at the altar, an overwhelming sense of emptiness filled the air. Leela, the woman he had given everything for, was nowhere to be found. The silence in the church grew deafening as the minutes ticked by. Was she running late? Was there an emergency? His mind raced, questions flooding his thoughts, each one more urgent than the last. But as time passed and Lila didn't show, the doubt began to sink in. There was no explanation that could make sense of this. What kind of woman would leave her groom on the most important day of their lives? What would drive her to abandon him so coldly, without a word, without a trace? What could have possibly led to this moment? As the guests began to murmur, Adam's mind raced to a dark place. It wasn't just a wedding that was falling apart. It was everything he had ever believed in. He had sacrificed so much for this woman. He had given her more than anyone could ever expect, even his own kidney, all in the name of love. And now, in an instant, it was all crashing down. But this wasn't just the end of a wedding. No, this was the beginning of something far worse, something that would shake Adam to his core and alter the course of his life forever. Behind the carefully composed facade of a pastor known for his compassion, something else had been building. It was something that would push him to the brink of madness. With his heart broken and his trust shattered, Adam was about to face a moment that would change him in ways no one could have anticipated. What happens when the man you love turns into the very thing you've always feared? What happens when betrayal takes root so deeply that the pain becomes unbearable? And, more importantly, what would Adam do when his sense of justice was pushed beyond the point of no return? Would the love he once felt for Lila turn into something else entirely? And when the truth finally comes to light, will anyone be able to understand the man he had become? These are the questions we will explore as we peel back the layers of a story filled with heartbreak, rage, and an unimaginable act of revenge. In the end, did Adam have any choice, or was he simply a man forever lost to the dark forces of betrayal? Adam was the kind of man who dedicated his life to helping others, selflessly serving his community. He was known for his unwavering faith and his commitment to the people around him. He was a man of God, a pastor who had built a life centered on his beliefs and the trust he had in those he ministered to. Every day, he devoted himself to those in need, offering support, comfort, and guidance to anyone who walked through the doors of the church. His life was simple, grounded in his faith, and above all, he believed in the power of love and forgiveness. Adam wasn't just a pastor. He was a protector of souls, a beacon of hope for those in his flock. But, as we know, life has a way of throwing challenges at us when we least expect it. For Adam, his greatest test came the moment Lila entered his life. Lila wasn't just any woman. She was everything Adam wasn't expecting and everything he never thought he would need. When she first walked into the hospital where Adam worked, it was like a force had entered the room. Her presence was undeniable, beautiful, confident, and poised. Leela seemed like the type of woman who had everything, but behind that elegance, there was a deeper, more complicated truth. It was clear from the start that she wasn't the kind of person Adam was used to dealing with. She had an air of mystery around her, something that made her both captivating and distant at the same time. Her charm was intoxicating, yet there was something about her that felt unreachable. It wasn't just her looks, though they were stunning. It was the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, and the way she made others feel like they didn't really know her at all. And that was exactly how Leela liked it. Leela wasn't just any woman. She lived in a world of luxury and secrets, a world where appearances meant everything and nothing was truly what it seemed. A high-end escort, she was no stranger to wealth, power, and influence. For her, love wasn't a bond. It was a transaction. She was accustomed to the life of being desired, of being bought, of offering herself to the highest bidder. In her world, everything had a price, and Adam, with all his good intentions, was just another man in a long line of people who didn't understand her true nature. Leela wasn't looking for salvation or redemption. Her world was one of control, a world where power wasn't just a privilege, it was a necessity. And Adam, well, he was nothing more than a fleeting moment in her life. He was a man who believed in the goodness of others, someone who believed that love could heal anything. But Leela wasn't interested in that kind of love. For her, Adam was simply another way to pass the time, another person to keep her entertained, while she lived a life of luxury that most could only dream of. But that didn't stop her from enjoying the attention he gave her. Adam didn't realize it at the time, but his life was about to change in a way he never could have imagined. And Leela, well, she had no idea that the man she was playing with had the kind of heart that would do anything for the woman he loved, even if it meant giving up a part of himself to save her. It wasn't love at first sight for Adam, but something about Leela stirred a feeling deep within him, something divine. From the moment they first spoke, there was an undeniable connection, a pull that Adam couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just her beauty, it was the vulnerability he sensed beneath her polished exterior. She wasn't like the women he had encountered. In his life, there was an emptiness to her, a quiet sadness behind her confident smile, and for some reason, Adam felt compelled to fill that void. He began to believe that he was meant to save her. There was a part of him that thought it was his calling, that the way their lives had intersected was no coincidence. His faith told him that sometimes the most broken people were the ones who needed saving the most, and he thought that Leela might be one of those people. He saw past her carefully constructed walls, past the facade she had built over the years. To him, she was more than just a woman of beauty and allure. She was a soul in need of redemption. Adam began to visit her more often, spending time talking with her, listening to her, and offering guidance, his heart growing fonder with each conversation. As the weeks passed, he believed she was beginning to change. But Leela, while intrigued by Adam's kindness and patience, never truly shared his vision of their future. Despite their obvious differences, the connection between them grew. She was drawn to his kindness, his faith, the way he seemed to offer a sense of peace she had never known. She saw the warmth in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Adam could be someone who cared about her in a way that no one ever had. But deep down, she knew she wasn't really in love with him. She was caught between her two worlds, the world of luxury, excitement, and control, and the world Adam offered, one of love, faith, and stability. Adam gave her something she didn't know she needed, but she wasn't ready to give up everything she had known for him. He was kind, gentle, and full of love, but he wasn't the thrill-seeking, powerful man she was used to. He wasn't her ideal, not by a long shot. And though she allowed herself to enjoy the attention he showered on her, she couldn't imagine a life with him. For her, Adam was a temporary escape from the emptiness of her own existence, a man who filled a void for as long as he could. But his love for her, his belief that she could change, only deepened with time, even as Leela's affections remained shallow. Despite his growing feelings, Adam continued to believe that she was worth saving, that with his love, she would find a new path. But as much as Adam poured himself into their relationship, Leela remained an enigma, one he could never fully understand. The truth was, she wasn't interested in the life he envisioned for them. She wasn't interested in being saved. She only wanted to keep playing the game she knew so well. When Lila's health took a turn for the worse, Adam saw it as his divine calling to help. It wasn't just a matter of offering medical support. It was a chance to truly make a difference in her life, to prove his love in a way that no one else ever could. Leela's renal failure had left her vulnerable, dependent on dialysis, and facing the terrifying reality that without a kidney transplant, her time could be running out. Adam, ever the compassionate pastor, believed this was the moment he had been waiting for. This was his chance to save not only her body, but her soul. He felt that this sacrifice would bring them closer, that it would prove to her the depth of his love and the sincerity of his commitment. With his unwavering faith, he believed that by giving her a part of himself, he could heal her both physically and emotionally. In his heart, he saw this as a divine test, one that he was willing to pass at any cost. Without hesitation, Adam volunteered to donate one of his kidneys to Leela. He underwent the tests, the procedures, and the risk, all with the belief that this would be the act that would forever bond them together. He didn't just want to save her life, he wanted to be her savior, to become the man she needed in a world that had been filled with so much darkness. The surgery was a success, and for a moment, it seemed as though everything was falling into place. Leela's health improved, and Adam's heart swelled with pride, thinking that this was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. He had given her a second chance, and in his mind, that was the ultimate act of love. But little did Adam know, this sacrifice, one that had cost him a part of himself, would soon be in vain. The reality of Leela's heartless detachment began to set in. Despite all he had done for her, despite the piece of himself he had given, Leela's feelings for him had never truly evolved. She was grateful, yes, but only for the gift of life, not for Adam himself. And as the days passed, the distance between them grew, while Adam saw this as a turning point in their relationship, a moment where Lila would understand the depth of his devotion. She began to retreat further into her own world, a world he could never truly understand. His selflessness and love were nothing more than fleeting moments for her. And, as time went on, the bond Adam thought was forming began to unravel. What Adam didn't realize was that this act of generosity, this moment of pure sacrifice, would not draw them closer. It would set the stage for a betrayal so deep it would shake him to his core. For Lila, Adam was never more than a placeholder, someone to fill the void while she waited for her real desires to come knocking. In the beginning, she enjoyed his company, even appreciated his kindness. He was a man who showed her a kind of affection she had never known, a kind of love that was selfless, sincere, and full of hope. But that was the problem. She didn't want hope. She wanted excitement. She wanted power, control, and everything that came with living a life that didn't involve compromise. To her, Adam represented stability, not passion. He was the safe choice, the man who would care for her, but she never saw him as the man who could ignite the fire she craved. Despite the kidney donation, despite his willingness to give her a piece of himself, Leela knew in her heart that he was never going to be enough. She had played along, letting him believe that he could be the one to save her, but deep inside, she knew the truth. She was never really in love with him. Adam was a stepping stone, a brief escape from her own turbulent life, but he wasn't the man who made her heart race. He wasn't the man who made her feel alive. Her heart belonged to the world of luxury, control, and high-profile clients, where love was a game, not a truth. In her world, affection came with strings attached, and the relationships she formed were transactional. The thrill she sought wasn't found in gentle, heartfelt gestures. It was found in the power she wielded over men, the status she held in the circles she moved in. She craved the wealth, the attention, and the dominance that came from being desired by powerful, influential men. Adam couldn't offer that. He wasn't the one who could give her the rush she was after. Her world was filled with men who bought her time, who catered to her every need and desire, and in return, she gave them a version of herself they could control, a version that was never truly real. For Lila, love was just another form of manipulation, a tool to get what she wanted. Adam, for all his devotion, was a man who believed in unconditional love. But to Lila, that was a fantasy, something that didn't exist in her reality. And as the days passed, she began to grow restless. The life she had settled into, with him, the quiet, predictable life, began to feel like a cage. She had played the role of the loving girlfriend, but the truth was, she was only biding her time. She needed more. And the moment she was presented with the opportunity to break free from the life Adam had envisioned for them, she took it without hesitation, because deep down, she knew that her true desires lay in a world far beyond the one Adam could ever offer. Just days before their wedding, Lila gets a call from the one man who had always given her what Adam never could: excitement, adventure, and endless wealth. The phone rang, its tone sharp and urgent, and as Lila listened, the familiar voice on the other end offered her an opportunity she couldn't ignore. It was her wealthy, high-profile client, the one she had kept in her life for years. He wasn't just any client. He was a powerful man, a man who made her feel like she was in control of her own destiny. He offered her more than just material wealth. He offered her the freedom to live life on her own terms, away from the mundane, away from a life she had already outgrown. A weekend getaway, a private villa far from the expectations and commitments she had with Adam. It was everything. She wanted an escape, an adventure, a chance to be the woman she truly was, not the one Adam believed her to be. As she stood there, phone pressed to her ear, Lila knew exactly what she had to do. She had spent months preparing for a life with Adam, and yet, in the deepest corners of her heart, she had never truly imagined herself as his wife. She had played the part, pretending to share his dreams, but she was never really part of that world. Adam's love, his devotion, his sacrifices, none of it could, filled the void inside her. She couldn't ignore the fact that her true desires lay elsewhere. With the man on the other end of the phone, the man who understood her in ways Adam never could. Adam was kind, patient, and loving, but he was also predictable and safe. The excitement she craved, the rush of living a life on the edge, was something Adam could never provide. With a heavy heart, she made a choice. Adam wasn't enough, not even close. The life he had envisioned for them, filled with quiet dinners, faith, and routine, was not the life she had in mind. She had tried to convince herself that this was the life she wanted, that Adam's love was all she needed, but deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. The truth was, she was never going to be satisfied in that world. Adam had given her his heart, his trust, and his very life, but in return, she had given him only a fraction of herself. And now, with the phone call as the final catalyst, Lila decided to take what she truly wanted, the life of luxury, excitement, and endless possibilities with her sugar daddy, life that would never be available to her with Adam. As she hung up the phone, the weight of her decision settled in. She was about to break Adam's heart, but she was also about to reclaim the life she had always longed for. The wedding she had once dreamed of was no longer on the horizon. It had been replaced with a different kind of future, one that she was determined to make her own on their wedding day. Adam stood with excitement in his heart, waiting for Lila, believing that his sacrifice had finally brought them together. The church was full, the air heavy with anticipation. Adam was dressed in his finest suit, looking every bit the man who had been dreaming of this moment for months. The guests were seated, the flowers arranged, the music ready to begin. He had poured everything into this day into Lila and into their future together. He had given up a part of himself, his own kidney, to save her life, and in his heart, this wedding was the culmination of that sacrifice. It was supposed to be the start of a new chapter, but as the minutes ticked by, the tension began to build. He could feel his heart racing as he stood at the altar, looking at the doors, waiting for them to open, for his bride to walk through. But as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, there was no sign of her. The church was eerily quiet, the only sound being the occasional murmur from the guests. Adam's smile began to fade, replaced by confusion, then concern. What could be taking so long? Was there a delay? Had something gone wrong? He tried to reassure himself that it was just nerves, that everything would be fine. But then, as the doors to the church remained shut, a sinking feeling took root in his stomach. His mind raced. Could she be having second thoughts? Was she nervous? But then, as the minutes stretched even further, the truth began to set in. Something was wrong. He turned to the guests, trying to gauge their reactions, but their faces were just as confused as his. It was then that the reality of what was happening hit him like a ton of bricks. Instead of walking down the aisle to join him, Leela had slipped away without a word and joined her sugar daddy. She wasn't in the church. She wasn't standing at the altar with him. Instead of beginning a life with Adam, she had made a choice that would change everything. Without any explanation, without a single word, she had vanished. She had left him standing there, humiliated in front of everyone. She had walked away from the life he had dreamed of, leaving Adam in the most devastating moment of his life, while Adam was left heartbroken and confused. Leela was miles away, living a life of luxury and excitement with the man who had always offered her more than Adam ever could. Instead of joining her fiancé at the altar, Leela slipped away to join her sugar daddy on a private getaway, a weekend she would never forget at Adam's expense. The life Adam thought they were building together was now nothing more than a distant memory, a cruel joke that Leela had turned into a harsh reality. The church, once filled with the sound of celebration, now stood silent. Adam's dreams, shattered in an instant, hung in the air like an unbearable weight. What had happened to the woman he had sacrificed everything for? What had happened to the love he had believed was real? As the minutes stretched on, Adam's heartache turned to disbelief. He had given everything for this moment, and now it was gone. Devastated and humiliated, Adam was left with nothing but his anger and shattered pride. His chest tightened as the reality of what had just happened sank in. He stood there, frozen in disbelief, unable to process the crushing weight of betrayal. The church, once filled with the joy of anticipation, now echoed with emptiness, the walls closing in around him. The guests who had gathered to witness what should have been the happiest day of his life were now silently shifting in their seats, awkwardly avoiding his gaze. Adam's hands trembled as he tried to hold back the tears, but his heart was in pieces. He had given everything for Lila, everything, and now she had left him without a word. His faith, which had once been a solid foundation in his life, now felt like an illusion, shattered in an instant. The love he had poured into her, the trust he had placed in her, seemed to mean nothing. He had given her the ultimate gift, the sacrifice of his own kidney to save her life, and she had repaid him by walking away. His faith had been broken, and with it, any sense of control he once had. He felt powerless, lost, like a man adrift in an ocean of confusion and pain. How could she do this to him? How could she betray him so deeply after everything he had done for her? His heart ached with the unanswered questions, each one more painful than the last. But beneath the heartbreak, there was something else beginning to take shape. Anger. A fire of rage that started to burn deep within him. Adam's mind raced as he replayed every moment they had shared, every word she had said, every promise she had made. How could she stand there, look him in the eye, and lie to him all this time? How could she pretend to love him when all along she was planning her escape, her betrayal? Friends and family had tried to warn him, but his faith in her was unwavering. They had seen what he couldn't, a woman who was never going to be the person he thought she was. His loved ones had raised their voices, telling him to be cautious, to open his eyes, to see the truth behind her charm. But Adam had refused to listen. He was convinced that love would conquer all, that with time Lila would see how much he truly cared for her, that she would change. His belief in her, in their future together, had blinded him to the reality that was staring him in the face. His family had warned him about the kind of life she led, the kind of person she was, but Adam refused to accept that Lila wasn't the woman he had imagined. Even after everything, he couldn't see her for who she truly was. He saw her as the woman he had sacrificed so much for, the woman who needed saving. But now, as the betrayal unfolded before him, he realized too late that he had been living in a fantasy. She had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable, and the pain of that realization hit harder than anything he had ever felt. His heart was broken, his trust destroyed, and the life he thought they were building together was nothing more than a lie. The anger inside him began to grow. How could she have done this to him? How could she have made him believe in something that was never real? The weight of her betrayal crushed him, and in that moment, Adam knew his life would never be the same again. He had given his heart to someone who didn't deserve it, and now he was left with nothing but the pieces of a broken dream, consumed by rage and a desire for retribution. Adam set out on a mission to find Leela and her sugar daddy. His heart, once filled with love, was now a storm of violence and desperation. Each thought of her betrayal ignited a fire within him, a fire that burned hotter with every passing minute. Adam had always prided himself on his self-control, his ability to remain calm, measured, and composed. But that Mantha pastor, who had spent his life helping others, was no longer in control. The man standing in front of the shattered remnants of his life was someone else entirely. Adam's mind raced, each thought more clouded than the last. She had humiliated him, discarded him like he was nothing after everything he had done for her. The trust, the love, and the sacrifice meant nothing to her. And now, in the wake of her betrayal, Adam knew what he had to do. His every step was driven by the single-minded pursuit of revenge. There was no room for forgiveness in his heart anymore, only the need to make her feel the pain she had caused him. As he began his search, the calm exterior he once held began to crack. Adam's rational mind, the one that had guided him for years, was slowly replaced by something darker, more dangerous. With every step he took, his resolve hardened. His love for Lila, which had once been pure and full of hope, had transformed into a cold obsession. He wasn't just hunting for answers anymore. He was hunting for her, for the man who had taken her from him. He had to make them pay for what they had done. The man who had once been a beacon of compassion was now something else. With each lead, each new piece of information, Adam's obsession grew. His thoughts became consumed with the idea of revenge, his mind unraveling further with every passing hour. The voices in his head grew louder, urging him to take action. He had already given so much for her. He had already sacrificed his own body for her survival. Now all that remained was the need for justice, the need to reclaim what he had lost. Adam tracked them relentlessly, his thoughts clouded with anger, the pain of betrayal echoing in his every move. His love had turned into something much more dangerous. He wasn't just trying to find them anymore. He was willing to destroy everything in his path to make them feel his pain, and soon it would drive him to the unthinkable. The calm, compassionate man who had been so willing to give was gone. In his place stood a man determined to make Leela and her sugar daddy pay, no matter the cost. Each step he took led him further down a path he couldn't turn back from, and deep down Adam knew he was about to cross a line he could never return from. What happened next would shock the entire country. Adam's confrontation with Leela and her sugar daddy wasn't just violent, it was brutal, calculated, and filled with the deep rage of betrayal. The moment he walked into the room, everything seemed to freeze. Time slowed, and for a brief moment, Adam stood there, staring at Leela and the man she had chosen over him, the man who had stolen the life Adam had dreamed of. She didn't see him at first. She didn't know he was there. But Adam knew. He could feel every ounce of rage and heartbreak flooding through his veins. His eyes locked onto her, and for a moment, he was consumed with the image of her smiling, carefree, her hand resting on the shoulder of the man who had replaced him. She looked at him with a mix of surprise and fear, but there was no remorse, no understanding of the destruction she had caused. In that moment, the pain of betrayal overwhelmed him. It wasn't just her leaving him at the altar. It was everything she had taken from him, everything she had promised and discarded without a second thought. The anger built up inside him, suffocating him until he couldn't hold it back any longer. He moved towards them with purpose, his hands shaking, his heart pounding with a fury he couldn't contain. Words came first, harsh, laced with the bitterness of a love unturned. He confronted them, asking her why, asking her how she could do this to him, asking her how she could pretend to love him when she had never cared at all. But the words weren't enough. The more he spoke, the more his frustration built. He felt helpless, powerless, and the anger began to boil over. He wanted them to feel what he was feeling, to experience the hurt, the shame, the destruction of everything they had taken from him. And then it happened. Without warning, he attacked. The violence was raw and unrestrained. It wasn't just a fit of rage. It was an act of calculated destruction. Adam, once a man of compassion and faith, now lashed out with everything he had. The confrontation escalated. Quickly, with Leela's sugar daddy fighting back, trying to protect himself. But Adam was relentless. His hands, once used to help and heal, were now used to destroy. The room became a blur of chaos. The violence wasn't just physical. It was emotional and psychological. Each blow was an expression of the pain he had carried for so long. The room was filled with the sound of struggle, the frantic noise of a life that had gone completely off track. And then, in the aftermath, the silence, the stillness in the room was deafening. What had once been a space filled with light and hope was now a place of darkness and ruin. The crime scene would be unrecognizable. Blood stained the walls, the floor, the furniture. The signs of the brutal struggle were everywhere. Objects shattered, furniture overturned, the room a testament to the raw violence that had unfolded. No one could have anticipated the dark turn Adam's life would take. The man who had once been a beacon of love and faith had now crossed a line from which there was no return. The brutality of the moment left its mark, not just on the room, but on Adam himself. In the end, it wasn't just a murder. It was the complete annihilation of everything Adam had once believed in. What had been a life full of faith, hope, and love was now a memory, swallowed by the violence of betrayal. The story of Adam's downfall wasn't just about the loss of a woman. It was the loss of everything that had once made him who he was. As news of the crime spread, the nation was divided. Was Adam a man driven to madness by love and betrayal, or was he simply a man who had lost touch with reality? The media couldn't get enough of the story, and soon it was all anyone could talk about. Public opinion began to fracture, as people from all walks of life voiced their thoughts on what had happened. Some viewed Adam as a victim, an innocent man who had been wronged by the woman he loved. They argued that his love for Lila had been genuine, that his sacrifice had been selfless, and that his actions were the tragic result of the deepest kind of betrayal. They saw him as a man who had been pushed to his breaking point by the woman he had trusted with his heart and his life. He gave her everything, one commentator said on a national talk show. He sacrificed a part of himself to save her, and this is how she repays him. I can't imagine the heartbreak he must have felt. Many sympathized with Adam's pain, believing that no man could endure the weight of such a betrayal without eventually cracking. Others, however, took a very different stance. They saw Adam as a monster, a man who had let his emotions completely take control of him. His actions were seen as an unforgivable crime of passion, a premeditated act of violence fueled by obsession. "There's no excuse for what he did," said a legal expert during a televised debate. "What Adam did goes far beyond love. This is about a man who couldn't handle rejection and decided to take matters into his own hands. He had no right to do what he did, and there is no amount of betrayal that justifies taking someone's life." People who held this view were quick to label Adam as a man who had crossed a dangerous line, someone whose emotional state had rendered him incapable of making sound decisions. They pointed out the fact that he had stalked Leela and her sugar daddy, tracked them down, and then committed murder. This wasn't love. It was possession, one victim advocate said, shaking her head. He thought he owned her, and when she no longer fit into his idea of what she should be, he took drastic, irreversible action. The debates raged on, with no clear consensus emerging. Some argued that Adam's crime was the result of a deep, consuming love, an act of passion that spiraled out of control. Others said that his actions were driven by entitlement, by a belief that he deserved her no matter the cost. But one thing was clear: Adam had crossed a line that could never be undone. Whether seen as a victim or a villain, the impact of his actions would forever change the course of his life. As the country continued to debate, the story of Adam and Lila would remain one of the most controversial and heartbreaking tales of betrayal and revenge the nation had ever witnessed. The investigation into Adam's actions was swift, but the truth wasn't so clear-cut. Was this an act of passion or cold, calculated murder? The authorities had their hands full as they tried to piece together the details of the crime. The crime scene was chaotic, a scene of brutal violence that left little room for interpretation. It was clear that Adam had confronted Leela and her sugar daddy, but the exact sequence of events leading up to the violence remained unclear. Forensic evidence from the scene was critical. Bloodstains and fingerprints were found throughout the room, indicating a fierce struggle between Adam and his victims. But the question remained: was this an impulsive, emotionally driven outburst, or had Adam meticulously planned the attack? Detectives soon discovered that Adam had been following Leela and her sugar daddy for days before the confrontation. He had tracked their movements, learning their routines, and even gathering information about their whereabouts. His obsession had become clear to investigators. This was not just an act of passion. This was the culmination of a man whose love had turned into an unhealthy fixation. Authorities found evidence that Adam had purchased a weapon prior to the crime, a chilling sign that he had planned the attack with a clear intent. The nature of the injuries inflicted on both victims suggested a brutal, targeted attack. It was hard to argue that this was anything less than an act of vengeance. The detectives quickly pieced together the timeline, from Adam's initial tracking of the couple to the deadly confrontation. Surveillance footage showed Adam approaching the property where the confrontation took place, his face hardened with purpose. His movements were deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly calm. The authorities were left grappling with the reality that this wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a premeditated act of revenge, one that was executed with chilling precision. The investigation progressed. The legal experts weighed in. Some argued that Adam's emotional state could be used as a defense. After all, the trauma of being abandoned on his wedding day by the woman he had given his kidney to had clearly shattered him. Could his actions be the result of temporary insanity, driven by overwhelming emotions and heartbreak? Others believed that Adam's actions were entirely inexcusable, regardless of his emotional state. They argued that the premeditation and brutality of the crime showed that he had acted with full awareness of what he was doing. "The law doesn't care about your heartbreak," one legal analyst said. Adam may have been deeply hurt, but that doesn't justify murder. The nation watched with bated breath as Adam's trial loomed. Would justice prevail, or would Adam become a tragic symbol of love's destruction? As the court proceedings approached, the question on everyone's mind was whether Adam would be convicted of murder or given some form of leniency for his emotional state. Would the jury see him as a man driven to madness by betrayal, or as a cold-blooded killer who had taken the law into his own hands? The weight of the trial was immense, and as the case made its way to the courtroom, the public's divided opinions on Adam only intensified. Some saw him as a victim of circumstance, while others believed he should pay the ultimate price for his actions. The world would soon find out what the final verdict would be, but no matter the outcome, one thing was certain: Adam's life, and the lives of those affected by his crime, would never be the same. Adam's actions left the world wondering, was it justified? What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Was it revenge, or was it a complete loss of morality? The question hung in the air, on the lips of legal experts, journalists, and ordinary people alike. For some, the answer seemed clear. Adam had been wronged in the most brutal way imaginable. After everything he had done for Lillatha, emotional and physical sacrifices he had made for her, he was abandoned on the most important day of his life. Some argued that no man could endure such a betrayal without facing the consequences. His actions, though extreme, could be understood through the lens of heartbreak and disillusionment. How could anyone recover from that? One of Adam's defenders asked in a televised interview. He gave her his kidney, literally a part of himself, and she left him at the altar without any explanation for a man who could offer her everything. Adam never could. For these people, Adam wasn't a murderer. He was a man who had reached his breaking point. He was the victim of an unthinkable betrayal, and in his desperation, he made a decision that ultimately destroyed him. They argued that the betrayal had pushed him over the edge, that the pain and humiliation of his situation had clouded his judgment. Was it revenge? Perhaps, but it was also, in their eyes, the tragic consequence of love unreturned. On the other side of the debate, however, was the undeniable fact that Adam had taken 2 lives in cold blood. The brutality of the murder was undeniable. His actions weren't just those of a man seeking to ease his pain. They were the actions of someone who had planned, tracked, and ultimately carried out a violent act with a chilling sense of purpose. No matter how much pain he had suffered, his crime was still murder. "You cannot justify murder, no matter how hurt you are," said one prosecutor during a public debate. Adam may have been devastated, but that does not give him the right to take someone's life. His actions were premeditated, and that makes this far worse than a crime of passion. The moral dilemma that Adam's case presented was as complex as the man himself. Could his actions be seen as a justified reaction to betrayal, or had he crossed a line that no human being should ever cross? Was his desire for vengeance a human instinct, or had he lost touch with any remaining sense of right and wrong? And, most importantly, could someone ever fully recover from such a loss of morality? As the nation debated, many questioned whether anyone under the same circumstances could act differently. Could anyone truly withstand the depths of betrayal Adam had experienced and still remain morally intact? Or was this simply a case of a man consumed by grief and rage, who let those emotions dictate his actions in the most irreversible way? For some, Adam's crime was a warning, an example of how unchecked emotions can lead to devastating consequences. For others, it was a tragic reminder of how deep love and trust can go, and how it can all be shattered in a single moment. In the end, Adam's story became more than just a tale of betrayal. It became a reflection of the very human condition. It asked difficult questions about love, loyalty, and justice. Could revenge ever truly be justified, or was it just another form of self-destruction? And ultimately, was Adam a victim, or was he just another man who lost his way, unable to find redemption in a world that had failed him? In the end, Adam's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the dangerous consequences of blind devotion. What price do we pay for love? And how far are we willing to go to reclaim what was taken from us? Adam's tragic path is a chilling reminder of the depths to which a person can fall when their emotions overpower their sense of reason. He gave everything for a woman who ultimately saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone in her pursuit of a life that never involved him. The sacrifice of his kidney, the unwavering faith he had in her, the belief that love could heal all wounds, all of it amounted to nothing when faced with her abandonment. But Adam's story goes beyond just personal heartbreak. It illustrates the dangers of becoming consumed by anything to the point where it erases everything else. The blind devotion he had for Lila, the need to believe in their love, clouded his judgment and ultimately destroyed him. What do we give up when we follow someone or something with unyielding faith? What are we willing to risk when we stake everything on love, on another person's promises, even when those promises are empty? For Adam, the cost was immense. His moral compass, once anchored in faith and compassion, became warped by his obsession, and in that obsession, he lost himself. But it's not just Adam who pays the price. His actions rippled outward, affecting not only Leela and her sugar daddy, but everyone around him, the people who once looked up to him, the community he had served, the family and friends who had tried to warn him. The aftermath of his crime shattered lives, leaving everyone questioning their own beliefs about love, trust, and revenge. This case serves as a warning not only to those who might find themselves in Adam's shoes, but to society at large. It reflects the complexity of love, the dangers of obsession, and the thin line between passion and destruction. We are all capable of great love, but we are also capable of losing ourselves in it. Adam's story challenges us to ask difficult questions. How do we protect ourselves from the destructive side of love? How do we know when we're crossing the line from devotion to obsession? And how do we prevent ourselves from losing our morality in the pursuit of something or someone that isn't truly worth it? The tragedy of Adam's life is not just about what he lost, but about how his inability to let go of his illusions led to a devastating series of events. His story asks us to reflect on the cost of unchecked emotions, the consequences of ignoring the warning signs of obsession, and the danger of allowing ourselves to be consumed by a love that is not mutual. In the end, it's not just Adam's story. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of losing sight of ourselves in the name of love. Story 2, The Monarch Crest, Revelation, Florida. Late September. The school year had just begun, and yet, before the leaves could even turn, everything changed. It wasn't the kind of news that made headlines at first. It was quieter than that. A note passed between students, a door left slightly open, a complaint that no one wanted to file. But once it started, there was no going back. In the heart of a school built on legacy and influence, something happened that would fracture reputations, destroy families, and ignite a fire far bigger than anyone expected. What began as a whisper inside one classroom soon became a roar across the country, and by the time it reached the public, the question wasn't just about what happened. It was about who we believe and why. Monarch Crest University stood like a monument, gated, polished, revered. Nestled in northern Florida, it was more than just a campus. It was a brand, a legacy, a promise of status passed down through generations. Its alumni roster read like a who's who of American influence. Senators, judges, Olympic medalists, CEOs. Every corner of the institution was built to reflect prestige. Marble pillars lined the administration building. A donor-funded research center glistened in the morning sun. The library carried first editions, not just textbooks. Parents called it elite. Students called it competitive. The world called it untouchable. On the surface, Monarch Crest championed equality. Promotional videos featured students of every shade. Brochures displayed diversity in smiling groups across manicured lawns. The mission statement spoke of fairness, inclusion, opportunity for all. But numbers didn't lie. Black enrollment remained just under 4%. In some departments, it was 0. In others, no one could remember the last time it wasn't. Conversations about change happened in closed rooms, never in public. The board approved statements, the administration held forums, but the culture remained untouched. Within the lecture halls, voices that didn't match the majority often faded into the background, and those who didn't fade stood out. Monarch Crest was built on tradition, and tradition, at its core, wasn't meant to change. Dr. Alana Poe was not hired to lead. She was hired to stand in ired when the protests grew too loud. When students demanded answers the administration didn't have. She was the compromise, the board's solution. One name, one resume, one photo in the faculty brochure. But she was never meant to speak the way she did. At 44, she had already lived what most of her colleagues had only studied. Howard undergraduate, Columbia for both her master's and doctoral degrees. Her research had been cited by Ivy League scholars. Her voice carried weight in academic circles far beyond the gates of Monarch Crest. Yet, inside those gates, she walked a narrower path. Her office sat at the far end of the humanities building, away from the main floor. The invitation to leadership meetings never came. Her opinions were rarely requested, and when given, quietly ignored. Still, she showed up every lecture, every semester, pressed blouses, precise notes. Her classroom wasn't just a place of learning, it was a place of reckoning. She didn't soften facts. She didn't repackage history to make it easier to hear. She taught with intensity, with sharpness, with clarity. Her students listened because they had no choice. The truth didn't pause for comfort, and for most, her honesty was unforgettable. But not everyone in the room came to learn. Some came to challenge, to dismiss, to discredit. And as semesters passed, a tension began to build quietly. A group of students whispered during lectures, laughed when she turned her back, dismissed her critiques as personal. They weren't used to being corrected, and they weren't used to someone who didn't flinch at their names or their families. But Alana didn't flinch. She had faced worse. She had survived worse. Still, something was shifting. The silence in faculty meetings became louder. The glances from colleagues lingered longer, and the weight of being the only one like her never got lighter. Monarch Crest had given her a classroom, but it never gave her cover. And in the fall of that year, everything she had held would find its release, not through anger, not through revenge, but through a decision that no one, not even Alana herself, would be able to undo. They weren't just students, they were legacies. Names that carried more weight than their GPAs ever would. Faces that graced the front row of campus events, only to vanish before midterms. They didn't need to follow the rules. The rules bent for them. Liam Reynolds was loud from the moment he entered a room. 18 years old, 6'2", built like he belonged on the cover of a sports magazine, and he often was. He was the captain of the lacrosse team, student liaison for athletics, son of State Senator Marcus Reynolds, a man who sat on committees that oversaw state education funding. Liam didn't just wear entitlement, he lived in it. He was the kind of student who could miss 2 weeks of class, walk into a professor's office, smirk, and say, "You know who my dad is, right?" And just like that, grades shifted, deadlines were erased. Liam wasn't interested in learning. He was interested in winning, in being right, in being untouchable. Then there was Owen Black, slightly shorter, sharper jawline. Always seen in designer sneakers his classmates couldn't afford, even on resale. He was the son of Arthur Black, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire. Owen didn't speak much in class. He interrupted. He challenged professors not with questions, but with smirks. He had a reputation on campus for throwing house parties that spilled into the streets, renting out rooftops, and paying off fines in cash before the police finished writing the citation. He enjoyed testing boundaries, skating just close enough to get noticed, but never far enough to face consequences. People didn't say no to Owen. They gave him options. Caleb Young was different. Quiet, calculated. You'd miss him in a crowd if you weren't paying attention. He didn't speak unless he had to. He didn't need to. His last name spoke loud enough. Both of his parents sat on Monarch Crest's development board. Their names were etched on the cornerstone of the school's newest dormitory. Caleb was the son who never caused a scene because he didn't have to. His power came in silence, in watching, in knowing. Professors hesitated before grading his work. Students noticed how his name stayed off the disciplinary list, even when he was clearly involved. Caleb didn't demand attention, but somehow everyone was always aware of his presence. Together, Liam, Owen, and Caleb formed an unbreakable trio, Monarch Crest's Golden Boys. They moved through campus like royalty, laughing in lecture halls, arriving late to labs, mocking policies they didn't respect because nothing was ever enforced. When faculty complained, the dean called for understanding. When other students raised concerns, they were told, "Let's not escalate." Professors learned to keep their distance. These boys weren't students. They were untouchable investments in the future of the institution. And then they walked into Alana Poe's classroom. She didn't adjust her tone for them. She didn't shrink beneath their names. She didn't let their interruptions pass unchecked. From the start, the friction was obvious. Liam smirked through lectures. Owen whispered jokes during readings. Caleb never took notes, but watched every move she made. The three of them sat in the same row, back left, just far enough not to be directly called on, but close enough to intimidate. It wasn't just about defiance. It was about control. They didn't come to learn. They came to test how far they could push. Alana reported them twice. The first time was after Liam loudly questioned her academic credentials during a discussion on Reconstruction. He laughed and asked, "Is that your opinion, or just a race thing?" She filed a formal complaint. No action. The second report came when Owen posted a doctored meme of her on a private group chat that leaked into the class. She submitted screenshots. Again, nothing. Still, she kept teaching. She kept showing up. Until that Tuesday. She was midway through her lecture, discussing the history of sexual violence as a tool during slavery. The room was quiet. The subject was heavy. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed the weight of the content. And then, from the back of the room, Liam leaned over to Owen and said something low, crude, unmistakable. A rape joke. The class froze. No one laughed, not even Owen. Alana didn't respond, not outwardly. She paused, looked up briefly, and continued the lecture. But her tone changed. Her pace slowed. The lesson ended without another word. Students filed out quietly. Liam and his friends didn't look back. That afternoon, she walked to the administrative office and filed her third report. This time, she detailed everything: the joke, the witnesses, the ongoing disrespect. She hit submit. She waited. And the next day, she received an email that simply read, "The incident has been reviewed and is considered resolved. No further action will be taken." That night, her apartment stayed dark. The air conditioner buzzed softly in the background. Her laptop sat open. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she wasn't typing. She sat in silence, not because she was afraid, but because she had heard this story before. Because this time, she was done waiting for someone else to write the ending. She remembers Georgia, summer of 1997. The kind of heat that hangs in the air long after the sun disappears. Alana was 17, sharp, quiet, the kind of girl who stayed late after school to stack chairs and wipe down chalkboards. Her world was small: church on Sundays, homework at the kitchen table, dreams folded neatly between Bible verses and college brochures. But everything changed the night she stayed too late. 3 boys from town, white football players. Everyone knew their names. Their fathers ran the city council. Their mothers chaired the PTA. They weren't just students. They were protected. That night, they told her she looked pretty, that she should come hang out. She hesitated. They laughed. She didn't want to seem scared, so she followed them out back, near the gymnasium, where the lights flickered and the janitor had already locked up. What happened next, she never wrote down, not the details, only the silence. The way her voice cracked when she screamed, the way the grass burned her knees, the way one of them laughed when it was over. She stumbled home past midnight. Her mother asked why her blouse was torn. Alana tried to explain, but the words got stuck. Her mother told her to wash up and go to bed. She cried in the shower until the water turned cold. The next morning, she went to the sheriff's office, alone. She told him everything: names, location, time. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and said, "You're sure about this? You don't exactly look like their type." Her file was stamped, filed, and never reopened. The boys played the next football game like nothing happened. One of them got a scholarship to LSU. Another went into real estate. The third married the daughter of the mayor. Alana stayed silent. At home, things got worse. Her mother burned the clothes she wore that night, told her it was better not to speak on it again, said girls like her didn't win battles like that, said if she wanted a future, she had to keep walking and never look back. So she did, but before she did, she wrote it all down in a red spiral notebook, lined with ink and shame. Every word, every name, every sound she couldn't unhear. That diary became her refuge, not a place to heal, but a place to survive. She carried it with her to college, tucked it between textbooks, folded it into suitcases. Every page a scar, every sentence a wound no one else could see. She never told another soul. She smiled in her scholarship photos. She aced her interviews. She climbed every ladder with the kind of strength that doesn't come from success, but from pain no one else ever acknowledged. She said to herself, when a system silences a scream, it doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in memories, in notebooks, in the back of the mind during quiet moments. And one day, it finds a new voice, one loud enough to be heard, even if the cost is everything. As she sat there reminiscing, she vowed to make the white boys pay. She was going to embarrass them. She started a study on behavioral genetics and ancestral traits in elite academic environments. She circulated it through student emails just after midterms, a time when upperclassmen were scrambling for credit boosts and resume builders. She claimed the study was introduced as part of a special topics course in applied history and social science. It promised a chance to contribute to an evolving field of research, a chance to stand out. Participation was voluntary. Samples would be collected for analysis. There would be no invasive procedures, no grades impacted, just contribution to a greater academic goal. Liam Reynolds responded immediately. His reply was curt but enthusiastic. He scheduled a session for Thursday afternoon. Owen Black asked 2 questions about whether there would be additional paperwork, then signed up for the following day. Caleb Young didn't write anything. He just clicked the confirmation link and showed up during office hours. Each appointment followed the same pattern. Alana greeted them with composure. She walked them through the consent process, handed them printed forms that referenced confidentiality, future publication, and genetic anonymization. She wore latex gloves. She wiped down every surface: water bottles, cotton swabs, sealed envelopes. They submitted hair strands, cheek swabs, and fingernail scrapings. She explained it was for heritage analysis and personality mapping. They nodded, along uninterested in the details. When it was over, she smiled, thanked them for helping advance the field, and sent them on their way. Not one of them asked what the study was really for. 7 days later, she stood beneath the fluorescent lights of the Northgate Police Department, clutching the torn strap of her handbag. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lips split open, bruising. Along her collarbone, her wrists bore marks too distinct to ignore. She took a deep breath and began recounting the story. She had stayed late in her office. She was grading papers. The boys arrived unannounced. They locked the door. She couldn't scream, she said. She tried. They pushed her. They laughed. They took turns. She used their names first: Liam, then Owen, then Caleb. Her voice trembled through the statement, but she didn't hesitate. She handed over the clothes she said she wore: a torn blouse, pantyhose, stained underwear. Her glasses snapped at the bridge. The officer listening to her report was new to the department. He took it seriously, called a female officer to sit with her, called a nurse. They brought her to the hospital immediately. The examination was thorough. Photographs were taken, swabs collected, statements logged. The rape kit was processed on rush status. By midnight, the lab called back. DNA found on every item, 3 contributors, all male, all matching student. Samples already in the university athletic system. There was no ambiguity, no overlap. By morning, the campus woke up to sirens and speculation. The first headline came from a small local blog, but it didn't stay small for long. By sunrise, national outlets were quoting police sources. By noon, cable news stations had picked up the story. By mid-afternoon, a live stream showed squad cars parked on campus. Liam Reynolds was arrested in sweatpants, still groggy from sleep, pulled from the dorms with flashlights shining in his face. Owen Black was mid-game, shooting hoops with teammates. Officers approached, asked his name, then cuffed him without explanation. He shouted something about his father's lawyer. Caleb Young was taken from a philosophy class. The professor stopped mid-sentence. Students froze. Phones were already recording. Within seconds, their arrests were uploaded to TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. The screenshots spread like wildfire. Alana's face appeared next. A headshot taken from the university's website. Professional, calm. Beside it, a caption: tenured professor accuses 3 students of violent rape in her office. Her quotes from past interviews were pulled and reposted. One from a panel on institutional silence went viral. The clip was less than 20 seconds, but in it, she said, there are places where silence is the policy, where what happens behind the door stays there as long as the names are powerful enough. The university released a brief statement. They acknowledged the investigation. They announced the suspension of the 3 students involved. They reassured the public that they were fully cooperating with authorities. Behind the scenes, they were in crisis mode. Public relations consultants were hired, press calls were diverted, donors were contacted to manage fallout. Liam, Owen, and Caleb were scrubbed from every official webpage. Their team profiles were deleted. Their student emails were shut down. Their upcoming games were cancelled. The school newspaper ran a full-page cover with their mugshots and the headline, "The Fall of Monarch's Finest." But while the story swept across the country like a tidal wave, questions slowly began to surface, quietly, in the corners of discussion threads, in student forums, from the investigators still piecing together the timeline. There was something off, something that didn't align. But for now, no one wanted to hear that. The world had already made up its mind. The case wasn't on trial, it was trending. And in the court of public opinion, the verdict had already been decided. With their sons behind bars, reputations in pieces, and legal bills rising by the hour, the families of Liam Reynolds, Owen Black, and Caleb Young were running out of time and options. Public opinion had turned cold. Media coverage was relentless. Every camera lens framed them as villains before a single court date had been set. Desperate for answers the police weren't asking, they turned to someone outside the system. Mark. Evans wasn't your typical investigator. Ex-military, former intelligence, sharpened by war zones, not boardrooms. He didn't speak much, but he listened better than most. He had a file on Alana Poe before the second phone call. He knew her academic background, knew what she published, knew where she ate lunch. He didn't need to ask permission to observe. He just watched. For 9 days, Mark tracked her movements with precision. He logged her schedule, mapped her routes, morning walks, grocery trips, lectures, staff meetings, church on Sundays. Then came the slip. Alana left town for a 3-day academic conference in Atlanta keynote address. An award, a hotel reservation in her name. She was on stage, giving a lecture about historical truth, while back in Florida, Mark was outside. Her apartment with a court-sanctioned search warrant and a local attorney present. They entered quietly. No damage, no drama, just purpose. The apartment was clean, organized, sparse. Books lined the shelves, sorted by region and century. Stacks of journals sat beside labeled USB drives. A framed photo of a younger Alana and her mother hung above the fireplace, but tucked behind the bottom drawer of her bedroom dresser, inside a shoebox taped closed, was something else. A leather-bound diary, worn at the edges, soft from years of handling. It wasn't part of any academic research. Inside were handwritten entries, hundreds of them, some dated as far back as 1997, others weeks old. They started with trauma, the night behind the gym, the sheriff's office, her mother's silence. The pages were heavy with pain, but then they shifted. The handwriting grew sharper. Entries started referencing Liam, Owen, Caleb. She wrote about their arrogance, their laughter, the way they sat in the back of her class, daring her to say something. She wrote about their names, their families, the things they said when they didn't think she was listening. Then came the plan, she described. The project, the setup, the sample collection. She listed the dates, times, the swabs, the labels. She detailed how she stored the materials, how she used makeup to mimic bruising, how she rehearsed her statement before going to the police. She even wrote the lines she planned to say, underlined them. There were no metaphors, no symbolism, just steps. Mark took photos of every page, catalogued each one, called the parent, then the attorney, then the police. When she returned, they waited until her 11:30 lecture began. Students were already seated, laptops open, phones silenced. Alana entered the room, sat down her notes, and greeted the class. She was wearing a navy blouse, slacks, low heels. Her voice was calm, unshaken. She began reciting the opening of a lecture on American propaganda through wartime. Then the door opened. 2 plainclothes officers stepped in. 1 uniformed officer followed. The room fell silent. No one moved. They called her name. She turned, blinked. Her eyes scanned the badges. There were no questions, no confrontation. She stepped back from the podium, reached for her bag, and was told to leave it. The cuffs clicked around her wrists. Students gasped. One screamed. Another pulled out their phone as she was walked out of the room. Her students stared, some confused, some horrified. No one spoke. The lecture never resumed. The building emptied by noon. The story the nation thought it knew was about to collapse under its own weight. The same week she was brought to court for her hearing. Barricades lined the front entrance. Police officers in yellow vests held back the crowd. Reporters angled microphones through narrow gaps. Inside, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Every bench taken, faculty members, students, family, press. No one moved, no one whispered. All eyes were locked on the woman seated at the defense table. Alana Poe sat still, hands folded, expression unreadable. Dressed in black, no jewelry, no makeup. Her attorneys flanked her, whispering occasionally. She didn't respond. The boys were seated on the other side. Liam, Owen, Caleb, thinner than before, pale, hollow. One wore a hospital band beneath his cuff. Another shook silently as his mother held his hand. The third hadn't spoken in weeks. What happened to them wasn't just legal, it was internal. 2 had attempted suicide. 1 had nearly died from an overdose. Their futures, once polished and pre-written, were now covered in scars. Testimony began. Witnesses took the stand. Experts spoke. Timelines were presented. The evidence unfolded frame by frame. Every journal entry, every step of the plan, every falsified document. And then came the moment no one could prepare for. Alana took the stand. She spoke softly. No tears, no anger, just the truth, her truth. She didn't deny what she had done. She didn't argue the evidence. When asked why, she paused, looked out at the courtroom, and said, "Because nobody believed me when I was 17. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it so the world would finally believe me." The words echoed. The room held its breath. Even the judge leaned back in his chair. The silence lasted longer than anyone expected. It wasn't a shock. It was heavy. The weight of decades of pain, of history. Then the gavel struck. 15 years. No possibility of early release. Reporters rushed out of the courtroom before the bailiff finished speaking. Within minutes, the story blanketed the news cycle. Live segments, breaking banners, split screens. America didn't agree. Some said she was the voice of buried injustice, a broken woman trying to make a system listen. Others said she was dangerous, that she weaponized pain, that she damaged a movement bigger than herself. Some called her a broken woman seeking justice. Others called her a threat to justice itself. The reaction didn't come in a single wave. It came in layers. It came in shouts, whispers, silence, and everything in between. In the days after Alana's arrest, the community split down the middle, not by race alone, not by politics, but by something deeper, something rooted in the need to either cling to belief or run from betrayal. On one side were those who still believed her, who refused to let her confession erase what she had survived. They said the system had failed her once and forced her hand, that what she did wasn't right, but it was understandable. Local churches held candlelight vigils. Her old students shared memories of her lectures, her brilliance, the way she challenged them to think beyond what was safe. And then there were those in the middle, the ones who didn't hold signs or post hashtags, the ones who watched it all unfold from their screens, who once called Monarch Crest a dream, and now couldn't say the name without a pause. The university tried to regain control, press releases, healing forums, listening circles, but the damage was already done, because the truth, once fractured, didn't come back whole. The community wasn't just reacting to a crime, it was reacting to something it couldn't unsee. How quickly belief can become a weapon, and how long trust takes to rebuild once it's been broken. Monarch Crest had always been proud of its silence, but now silence had become its loudest failure. In the end, this wasn't just a case, it was a mirror, one that forced us to look at the systems we trust and the stories we believe. It asked questions most people avoid. Who gets to be believed? Who gets the benefit of doubt? And what happens when the line between victim and perpetrator becomes too blurred to recognize? What happened at Monarch Crest wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about how far pain can stretch before it tears something apart. Alana Poe carried a wound that never healed. She walked into a world that never fully accepted her, and in the absence of justice, she created her own. But the fallout was massive. 3 families were destroyed, a school forever stained, a country forced to face the cost of silence and fabrication. This story will live on, not just in court transcripts or news archives, but in the minds of everyone who watched it unfold. It challenges us to sit with discomfort, to ask better questions, to stop choosing sides before we understand the whole picture. Because if justice is real, then it must be built on truth, and truth, no matter how painful, must never be forced into fiction. Story 3. The Judge's Decente quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind where everyone knows your name, but behind closed doors, one woman's secrets were about to destroy everything. A judge, a convicted felon, and a love story so twisted it would shake the justice system to its core. What happens when a judge, trusted to uphold the law, falls victim to the very crime she swore to prevent? Judge Sarah Jenkins, a respected judge, had it all. A flourishing career, a loving husband, and a future that seemed destined for greatness. A career built from the ground up, filled with high-profile cases and the trust of her peers. She was a woman whose life reflected achievement and ambition. Her marriage to Mark had long been the foundation of her success, their shared dreams of family and prosperity having blossomed into the picture of perfection. Their home, nestled in a quiet corner of the city, was a reflection of their life together, well kept, elegant, and filled with promise. To the outside world, Sarah was the epitome of success. But in the quiet corners of her mind, there were cracks, subtle but growing. And it was in these cracks that James Riley slipped in, unnoticed at first, and then like a flood, he took over. He wasn't much more than a name at first, a convicted felon in prison for violent crimes, someone whose past was as shadowed as his present. But when their paths crossed in the sterile world of legal paperwork, something stirred inside Sarah. It was innocent at first, a letter asking for legal counsel, a request that seemed trivial, just part of the job. But as the letters continued, something more began to grow. What began as a professional connection blossomed into something deeper, something that Sarah could no longer control. She found herself thinking about him long after the workday had ended. His words articulate, thoughtful, and surprisingly introspective began to seep into her thoughts, filling the spaces left behind by the demands of her marriage and career. She'd sit at her desk at home, reading his letters, rereading the carefully crafted words that had begun to make her feel understood in a way Mark hadn't in years. As the months passed, her connection to James evolved. What had once been a professional courtesy soon turned into something else entirely. His letters became more personal, filled with confessions of loneliness, regret, and a yearning for a life beyond the prison walls that confined him. Sarah, increasingly drawn in by his words, found herself responding not only with legal advice, but with empathy, understanding, and finally, something more dangerous, affection. It was in those late-night moments, when her husband was asleep and the house was quiet, that Sarah would find herself reading his letters again and again. She'd feel a strange pull, an emotional connection that was impossible to ignore. Mark, her loving husband, was still present, still the man who had stood by her side through everything. But the more Sarah read James's words, the more distant Mark seemed. She tried to shake off the feelings that stirred inside her, but the connection to James grew stronger. And when James's voice finally came through the phone, it felt like a whisper from another life, one filled with passion and possibility. It wasn't long before the calls began, the late-night conversations that would stretch on for hours. What started as simple updates on his legal case soon shifted to more intimate talks about dreams, regrets, and desires. James's voice had a way of pulling her in, of making her feel seen in a way that Mark no longer did. The growing divide between Sarah and her husband was subtle at first. Mark noticed her distance, the way she'd turn away when he spoke, the way her attention seemed to wander. He chalked it up to stress from her work, the strain of balancing a high-profile career with a busy home life. But Sarah knew better. The truth was that something was missing from their marriage, something that James's letters had begun to fill. It wasn't just an affair of the body, but an affair of the mind, of the heart. As the relationship between Sarah and James deepened, her marriage began to unravel. The late-night calls became more frequent, the meetings more secretive. Sarah had told herself that she was just helping him, guiding him through a difficult legal case. But the more she spoke to James, the more she realized that she was lying to herself. What had started as professional advice had morphed into a twisted form of longing. Sarah wasn't just helping James, she was becoming addicted to him. His voice, his words became the center of her world, and with each passing day, she found herself growing further apart from Mark, further from the life she had once known. Sarah knew what she had to do. She couldn't walk away from James and her husband. He had to go. Sarah had once been a woman of principle, a judge who weighed the scales of justice with a steady hand. But now she was standing at a precipice, the weight of her choices pressing down on her with crushing force. She had fallen in love with James Riley, a man incarcerated for a violent past, and as their connection deepened, it became clear that there was no turning back. In her mind, the only way to fully escape the life she had built her marriage, to mark the career she had spent years cultivating, was to sever the ties that bound her to him. But the deeper Sarah fell into her obsession, the more she realized that to have a future with James, she would need to destroy everything standing in her way. And that meant Mark. The plan began to take shape slowly, like a shadow creeping across the landscape of her mind. It wasn't just about ending her marriage. It was about securing her future, about ensuring that nothing stood between her and the life she envisioned with James. The thought of divorce never crossed her mind. Divorce was too easy, too clean. No, for Sarah, this would be something far more final. It had to be. It had to be an accident, an event that could be explained away, that no one would question. She knew the world would see her as a grieving wife, a woman torn apart by tragedy. But in reality, she was already planning the next phase of her life, the life that would begin the moment Mark was gone. The idea of murder had always been something distant, something she never thought she'd consider. But as she watched her husband, every day, as the weight of their failing marriage settled heavily on her chest, she realized it was the only option. Mark was a man she no longer recognized, a man who had become a stranger in the house they had built together. The late nights, the distance between them, it was as if he was no longer part of her world. And James, though incarcerated, became everything to her, her confidant, her partner, her escape from the life that suffocated her. Sarah's decision to kill Mark wasn't born from hatred. It was born from a desperate, obsessive desire to escape, to free herself from a life she no longer wanted. Every conversation with James made her feel seen, heard, and understood things that had slowly withered away in her marriage. And so, as the thought of murder took root, it grew into something justified in her mind. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't about revenge. It was a sacrifice she was willing to make to find true freedom, a necessary evil to start anew. As she sat alone in her office, the room dimly lit by the late evening sun, she stared at the legal documents in front of her, the ones that would lay the groundwork for what was about to happen. Mark had life insurance policies, and Sarah knew they would provide a convenient cover-up for the tragic accident that was about to unfold. The pieces were falling into place one by one, and as she erased any trace of her communication with James, Sarah began to feel the weight of the plan lifting off her shoulders. The future she had dreamed of was finally within her reach. As she moved through the days, playing the dutiful wife in front of Mark, keeping up the charade, Sarah's mind was already on the future. She knew exactly how the accident would play out. She had studied it meticulously. A car crash late at night, rain on the road, an unfortunate twist of fate that would leave her devastated yet untouched by suspicion. No one would question her grief. No one would question her sorrow. Not even the police would see the cracks she had hidden so well. The plan was perfect, or so she thought. But as the days passed, doubt began to creep in. It was never a straightforward decision, even though she tried to convince herself that it was the only way forward. She found herself in the quiet hours of the night, looking over Mark's belongings, questioning the life they had shared, the promises they had made. Was this really the only way? Could she have just walked away instead? But each time the doubt surfaced, it was quickly smothered by the thought of her future with James, the man who had given her the attention and understanding she had craved for so long. The affair was no longer about an emotional escape. It had become a means to an end, and that end was James. To have him, to live with him. She would have to eliminate everything that stood in her way. The final decision came one evening as Sarah sat in her office, staring blankly at her reflection. In the window, the weight of the decision was palpable, but she knew she had already made it. She could no longer pretend that she wasn't planning the unthinkable. She had crossed that line, and there was no going back. Mark had become a liability, a man whose presence in her life was nothing more than a reminder of what she no longer wanted. She looked down at the insurance papers, a flicker of finality passing through her. This would be her escape. It was time to act. With the plan in motion, Sarah found herself moving through each day with a new sense of purpose. There was a calmness in her steps, a quiet certainty that she hadn't felt in years. As she watched Mark, oblivious to the storm swirling around him, she could almost taste the freedom that was coming. But deep inside, there was a gnawing feeling, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, but it was something close. Something that warned her that the choice she had made was irreversible, and that once it was done, there would be no coming back. 3 months after her husband's death, Sarah thought she had outrun the past. She had set the wheels of her new life in motion, the life she had longed for, the one that would begin once she walked away from the remains of her old world. Her plans had become clearer than ever before. The affair with James had been the escape she needed. The prison walls that had once confined him were now nothing more than a memory. And with Mark gone, nothing stood between her and the future she had dreamed of. But as she prepared for her final rendezvous with James, what she believed would be the moment, she could step fully into the life they had envisioned together. She never imagined the trap she had walked right into. What was supposed to be a reunion, an affirmation of everything Sarah had sacrificed for, turned out to be the point of no return. She walked into the conjugal room with anticipation, her heart beating faster as the door closed behind her. The walls of the small room were now charged with the same electrifying energy that had once existed between them, but this time, something was different. James sat in the corner, a shadow of the man she had fallen for. His gaze was cold, unreadable. Something had shifted. Where was the warmth she had expected? Where was the passion that had once fueled their every word? Instead, a strange tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. James, the man she had once believed to be her savior, now seemed like a stranger. The familiar spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by something darker, something that hinted at betrayal. His face, once soft with affection, was now set in hard lines, a mask of distrust. The warmth in his voice, which once soothed her in the quiet moments of the night, had turned into a chilling monotone. Sarah couldn't understand it. Hadn't she given him everything? Hadn't she built a future for them both, forged in the fire of passion and desperation? And yet here he was, distant, cold, and full of something she hadn't prepared for - suspicion. James sat across from her. The weight of silence settled over them. Sarah tried to bridge the gap, but each attempt to speak, to re-establish the intimacy they had shared, felt hollow. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, scrutinized. She had spent so long telling herself that she was in control, that the life she had created with James was the escape she had dreamed of. But now, in the presence of a man who had once been her partner, she realized that control had slipped from her grasp long ago. James's voice broke the silence. But it was not the voice of the man she had known. It was sharp, filled with an edge she hadn't heard before. He questioned her, not about their future together, not about the plans they had made, but about Mark. He questioned the details of her marriage, of her motives for ending it. He spoke with a sense of authority, as though he had all the answers. It was as though he had already decided what this visit was really about. Not about love, not about reuniting, but about control. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach as she realized that James, the man she had trusted, had already made up his mind. James's eyes locked onto hers, searching for something. What exactly was he looking for? Was it guilt, regret, or was it something darker, a sense of victory, as if he had already figured her out, as if he had already decided that she had betrayed him? The sudden shift in the atmosphere was palpable, as though a veil had been torn away to reveal the truth. James was not just the lover she had known. He was someone else entirely, someone who had been playing his own game all along. Sarah, too blinded by her obsession with him, had failed to see it. The more James spoke, the more Sarah realized that this was not going to be the reunion she had imagined. What began as a passionate love affair, full of promise and excitement, had now turned into a battle of wills. The love that had once connected them had been replaced by something far darker, a dangerous, manipulative game of power. What was supposed to be a meeting of two souls desperately trying to escape the confines of their past had become a confrontation that Sarah wasn't prepared for. As James leaned forward, his voice growing colder with every word, Sarah's thoughts became jumbled. The question of trust, once so easily answered, now echoed in her mind. Could she trust him? Could he trust her? The roles had reversed. James, once a prisoner to his own past, was now the one in control. And Sarah, the judge, the woman who had once held the power to decide the fate of others, was now the one facing the consequences of her own decisions. Then it happened, the moment Sarah would never forget. James moved quickly, too quickly for her to react. The shock of his actions was so sudden, so violent, that it felt like the air was sucked from the room. She gasped, her heart racing as his hands gripped her, pulling her into a hold that left her no room to escape. Her mind screamed for her to fight back, to run, but it was too late. This wasn't a passionate embrace. This was something much darker. James, the man she had trusted with her heart, had become the very thing she feared most. In that moment, Sarah realized that everything she had done to reach this point, every choice she had made, had led her here, to this cold, sterile room where love had turned into violence. The very place where she had believed her dreams would come true had become her tomb. The man she had risked everything for, the man she had trusted with her secrets and desires, was now the one to end her life. James's revenge was swift, unexpected, and final. And as Sarah's life slipped away, her final thoughts were not of freedom, not of the life she had hoped to build with James. Instead, her last thoughts were of the terrible, heartbreaking realization that love, when it's twisted and corrupted, has the power to destroy everything. She had never seen it coming, and in the final moments of her life, she understood the one truth she could never escape. In the end, the one you trust most can also be the one to destroy you. The aftermath of Judge Sarah Jenkins's fall was not just a story of public scandal. It was a case that shook the very foundation of the justice system itself. Once a respected judge, a woman who had held power over others' fates, Sarah had become the very thing she once judged. And in the aftermath of her actions, the media explosion that followed became a spectacle that the world could not ignore. Sarah's life had unraveled, and the public was forced to grapple with the fallout of her choices. What began as whispers behind closed doors soon became a roar of judgment across every news outlet, every television screen, every social media feed. Sarah's name was on the lips of every commentator, every pundit, every person with an opinion. She was no longer the embodiment of law and order. She had become the face of betrayal and moral failure. And as the story unfolded, people began to ask the questions that had never crossed their minds before. How could someone who had dedicated her life to the law so completely abandon it? And how could a woman who had once been so revered fall? So far, so fast. The media frenzy was a beast, relentless, unforgiving. News outlets ran endless specials on Sarah's case, dissecting every detail, every motive, every piece of evidence that led to her ultimate fall. But the story was more than just about Sarah herself. It became about the justice system. How could someone in her position, someone trusted with the lives of others, betray that trust so completely? The law that Sarah had spent years upholding now found itself under scrutiny, as people debated how someone so entrenched in the system could have so completely lost her way. And then there was the public reaction. The opinions were as divided as the story itself. Some saw Sarah as a victim, trapped by the overwhelming pressure of her career, her marriage, and the affair that had pulled her into its web. They argued that she had been blinded by her emotions, that love in its purest form had led her to a point of no return. Others, however, saw her for what she was, a manipulator, a woman who had used her position for her own selfish gain, someone who had chosen her desires over everything else. The division in the public was sharp, and it was clear that no one could agree on who Sarah really was. In the days and weeks that followed the trial, people took sides. Some felt sympathy for the woman they believed had been overwhelmed by her emotions, while others couldn't shake the image of a judge who had corrupted the very system she had sworn to uphold. As legal experts weighed in, some tried to explain Sarah's actions as the result of a deep emotional breakdown. A woman caught between love, betrayal, and the weight of her responsibilities. But others pointed to her calculated actions, the hidden messages, the deleted texts, the plans she had meticulously laid out. They saw a woman who had coldly manipulated everyone around her for the sake of her own desires. The debate was heated, and it wasn't just about Sarah. It was about the fragility of trust and the true nature of justice. In the public's eyes, Sarah had become both a victim and a villain. The courtroom had already rendered its judgment, but the court of public opinion was far from finished. Interviews flooded the airwaves. Legal analysts, once her colleagues, now criticized her choices. They debated whether she had been consumed by a love she couldn't control, or whether she had willingly chosen to sacrifice everything: her marriage, her career, her integrity for the sake of an affair. But the most haunting question was one that lingered in the back of everyone's minds. Could love really drive someone to destroy everything they had worked for? Could obsession, when left unchecked, tear apart even the most solid of foundations? But the media coverage didn't just focus on Sarah, it shifted to James. His role in the tragedy was now being scrutinized as well. How had a man incarcerated for violent crimes, someone who had been locked behind bars for years, managed to manipulate Sarah so completely? His charm, his ability to lure her in, had been both his weapon and his undoing. Legal analysts debated whether James had been an innocent pawn in Sarah's game, or whether he had been the one orchestrating the tragedy all along. Was he simply a man trying to escape his past, or was he playing a dangerous game of his own, one that ultimately led to Sarah's destruction? The questions surrounding James only deepened the public's fascination with the case, leaving everyone wondering just how much of this was driven by love, and how much by manipulation. And then, as the world continued to watch, James's arrest came. As a shock, he had been caught, and now the justice system was left to confront its own failures. How had someone like James, someone who had been so adept at manipulating those around him, managed to deceive the very system that was supposed to protect them? As Sarah's actions were analyzed and scrutinized, it became clear that this case was about more than just one woman's fall from grace. It was about the flaws in the system, the cracks that allowed a person like James to slip through, and the damage that could be caused when trust was shattered at the highest levels of power. James's capture brought with it a sense of finality, but also a deep sense of unease. How had Sarah, a woman who had been entrusted with so much, fallen so far? How had she allowed herself to become so enmeshed in a relationship that led her to murder, to betrayal? But the questions didn't stop there. As James's trial approached, it became clear that the public had one last question to answer. How could a man locked away in prison use his charm to destroy the life of someone like Sarah? How could his calculated moves bring down the entire structure of her life and expose the fragile, flawed nature of the justice system? Sarah's story didn't just end in tragedy. It left behind an unanswerable question. Can love truly blind us? Or is it simply the result of our deepest, darkest desires? For Sarah, her love for James had consumed her, and in the end, it was the one thing that she could never control. The justice system, which she had once represented with such honor, could never repair the damage she had caused with her own hands. Her story was a cautionary tale, a reminder of just how easily obsession can cloud judgment, and just how dangerous it can be when the boundaries between love and manipulation become impossible to distinguish. Story 4. The Easter Reckoning. Celebrated Easter with smiles, matching outfits, and a photo that said, "We've moved on." But one person was missing, and by the next sunrise, he made sure everyone knew it. A respected pastor, a proud father, a man once trusted to lead souls to salvation. Now the face of a crime that left an entire town speechless. He didn't break in, he didn't hide. He walked through the door like he still belonged there. What happened next wasn't a moment of madness. It was planned, cold, and final. But why? What was taken from him that made him take everything? What pushes a man from preaching love to orchestrating loss? This is more than a murder story. This is a reckoning. and it began the moment they chose to celebrate without him. Stay with us, because the truth behind what happened at Easter is far from what you've heard. Pastor David Cole, 41 years old, senior pastor of Grace Tabernacle Church in Huntsville, Alabama. To the outside world, he was everything a leader should be: charismatic, disciplined, articulate. He had a voice that filled the room and a presence that made people lean in. Church mothers swore he was chosen. Men in the congregation tried to model themselves after him, and young people, especially the boys, looked to him as the blueprint. On Sundays, he stood tall behind the pulpit, but during Easter, he became something else entirely. He wrote the plays, directed the children, acted out the resurrection himself. Every detail had to be perfect. Every spotlight had to land just right. It wasn't performance, it was control. David married Maria when she was 23. Back then, she was the star of the church choir. She had a laugh that lit up rooms and a voice that could stop people mid-sentence. The church called them a power couple, spiritually aligned, equally yoked. They had 3 children together: Jacob, the quiet one with big questions; Chloe, curious; and kind Noah, the youngest, full of joy. Their photos were framed across the church hallway, always smiling, always in sync. But inside their home, the reality was different. David believed God called him not just to lead, but to rule. There was no secular music in the house, no movie nights unless he approved the film, no social magia, no sleepovers. The kids' birthdays were celebrated quietly. No parties, no decorations, just prayer. Any disagreement was labeled rebellion. Any emotion outside of peace was met with correction. Maria stopped singing first, in public, then in private. She smiled less, spoke less, and eventually existed less. Friends noticed, some asked. Most stayed silent, because who were they to question the man of God? David rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. His authority filled the room without it. The kids never acted out in church. They sat still, said, "Yes, sir," quoted scripture. But at night, Chloe began wetting the bed. Jacob started journaling about escape. Noah clung to his mother like he knew something she wouldn't dare say out loud. The walls of the Cole home were lined with verses, photos, and awards, but none of them told the real story. Behind closed doors, obedience was mandatory. Questioning was seen as betrayal. Love was measured in submission, and fear had its own seat at the dinner table. He didn't just demand obedience, he expected worship, in his house and in his marriage. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. Maria didn't wake up one morning and decide to rebel. It started with silence, with questions she didn't say out loud, with glances in the mirror that lasted a little too long. She began attending women's meetings alone, sitting in the back instead of the front row. She stayed after service to talk. To Sister Anya, an elder in the church who had seen too much in her lifetime to ignore what others dismissed. Anya listened, never judged, and eventually she became the only place Maria could let the truth slip out. David noticed the change. He always noticed. He began accusing her of being influenced by worldly spirits. He preached about wives who abandoned their roles, about households where the enemy enters through disobedience. And though he never said her name, everyone knew who he meant. His sermons turned sharp, filled with veiled threats and scriptures, about judgment. And one Sunday, during communion, the mask slipped. Maria stood up as he led the congregation in prayer, and she walked out in front of everyone. No excuse, no explanation, just silence and heels clicking down the aisle that day. David came home angry. The argument turned physical. David hit his wife severely. Neighbors reported hearing, shouting, something breaking, and a door slamming. 2 days later, Maria filed a restraining order and took the kids with her. In court, she said she feared for her safety and the safety of their children. The judge granted full custody to Maria. David was given supervised visitation. The church board met in private. They asked for his resignation, citing moral instability and the growing public divide. David left quietly, but inside, he was unraveling. He moved into a small rental on the edge of town, stopped shaving, stopped preaching. He told himself he was being persecuted, that she had turned the children against him, that the church had betrayed him. And while he sat alone watching old sermons on repeat, Maria was rebuilding, slowly, gently. She enrolled the kids in new schools, joined a new church, and started leaning on someone she had known since childhood, Daniel Rivers. Daniel was 43, a widowed father of one, steady, dependable, kind. He helped fix things around the house, picked the kids up when Maria worked late, never overstepped, never asked for anything. He just showed up, and when the kids began calling him Uncle Daniel, it felt natural. Within a year, Maria married. Him quietly, no big ceremony, just close friends and a few photos on her private page. But one photo made its way back to David. Daniel standing on the front porch, keys in hand, smiling. Behind him, the house David had built brick by brick, dollar by dollar. The same house where he once laid hands and prayed over every room. And now another man lived there, laughed there, loved there. David stared at the photo for hours, didn't speak, didn't blink. The house wasn't just a home, it was his kingdom. And now he was a ghost outside its gates. Easter Sunday, April 20th, 2025. David Cole sat alone in a run-down motel on the outskirts of Huntsville. The walls were stained with time, the bed sagged in the middle, the heater clicked and rattled. With every breath of air it pushed out. The man who once stood tall behind pulpits now hunched over in silence, his voice no longer filling rooms, but fading quietly into himself. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching old sermons on a battered laptop. His younger face flashed across the screen, confident, powerful, adored. But here, in this dim room, his eyes were sunken, his skin pale, his world smaller than it had ever been. Outside, the world was celebrating. Church bells rang, children laughed, choirs sang about life, about hope, about new beginnings. But inside that room, something else stirred, something David hadn't spoken to anyone about, something that had been building silently for far too long. He opened Facebook. There they were, his children, Jacob, Chloe, Noah, his ex-wife, Maria, her new husband, Daniel, and his own mother, all standing on the front lawn of the house he had built. Daniel held Noah on his shoulders. Chloe stood beside Maria in a yellow dress, holding her hand. Jacob, taller now, stood like the new man of the house, and his mother. She smiled like nothing had ever been lost. The caption read, "He is risen. And so are we as a family." He didn't scroll, he didn't blink. He just stared. Minutes passed, then hours still. He sat. No tears, no screams, just silence. He reached over and picked up a small black notebook. The pages were empty. He opened the first one and began writing, not thoughts, not feelings, verses. Verses about vengeance, verses about betrayal. Phrases like, "The Lord will repay," "Blood cries from the ground," "The wicked will not go unpunished." His handwriting started neat, then pressed harder. When the page was full, he didn't pause. He flipped to the next, then another. Once the pen stopped, David moved slowly, calmly. He packed what he believed mattered, a Bible, his old white pastoral robe, a pistol, a camera, and a tripod. Every item had a place, every movement had purpose. He folded the robe gently. He zipped the Bible into its case. He placed the camera in the front seat. By nightfall, he checked out of the motel. No words to the clerk, no eye contact, just keys left on the counter. The road was dark, the air was still, and gospel music played low through his speakers as he drove. He didn't speed, he didn't stall, he just drove toward the house, toward the family, toward the ending he had already written in his mind. As morning began to break, while others prepared to celebrate resurrection, David Cole prepared to make sure no one in that house would ever celebrate it again. That Easter night, one man resurrected the rage he buried beneath the robes. David pulled into the driveway just before dawn. The street was still, the air was quiet to quiet. A soft golden light crept over the rooftops, casting long shadows. Across the lawn, the house stood there like a memory he hadn't finished with. He stepped out of the car calmly, no rush in his walk, no shake in his hand. The pistol was tucked close against his ribs, the camera bag slung over his shoulder like it was just another Sunday morning. He approached the door like he'd done hundreds of times before, as if he still belonged. No knock, no hesitation. Daniel opened the door, confusion in his eyes. Before a single word could be spoken, David fired. One shot, straight to the chest. Daniel dropped instantly. The sound echoed through the house. It wasn't just a gunshot, it was a crack in time. A moment that split everything before from everything that would come after. Maria screamed. She appeared in the hallway, holding Noah tight against her chest. Her instincts kicked in. She ran toward David, shielding their son. He raised the gun again. 2 shots. One struck her shoulder, the second her chest. She collapsed onto the hardwood floor, still holding Noah, her arms wrapped around him even as life slipped away. In the commotion, Chloe and Jacob ran from their rooms toward the kitchen. David followed fast and without pause. He didn't call out their names. He didn't hesitate. He fired again. Jacob took a bullet to the back as he tried to shield his sister. Chloe froze, paralyzed by fear, and he fired once more. She fell beside her brother, just feet away from the refrigerator where she'd hung her Easter artwork the night before. And then, silence. Only one sound remained. His mother. She stood at the top of the stairs, motionless, staring. Her lips parted, her body trembling, hands clutched to the railing like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She didn't scream. She didn't move, just stood there, watching the son she raised become someone she no longer recognized. David said nothing. He didn't even look her in the eyes. He walked past the bodies into the hallway closet, pulled out the storage bin marked Easter. Inside, pastel outfits neatly folded, little baskets, plastic eggs, ribbons, things meant for joy. Now being used for something else. One by one, he dressed them. Maria in her yellow dress, Daniel in a pale blue shirt, Jacob, Chloe. No, each in the outfits they were supposed to wear that day. He wiped the blood from their skin, brushed their hair, arranged their limbs, adjusted their clothes. Then he positioned them at the dining room table. He sat them upright in chairs, folded their hands, tilted their heads. He placed pastel Easter eggs gently into their fingers, smoothed down collars, straightened ties, moved limbs with the careful precision of a man staging something sacred. He set up the tripod, attached the camera, adjusted the angle. Then he pressed the timer. The camera flashed once, then again. He looked at the screen. Then he uploaded the photo to Facebook, to the exact thread where Maria had posted their Easter celebration the day before. Same smiles, same room, same table, only now frozen in death. His caption, "He is risen, but they won't be." The photo hit the internet before police were ever called. People paused mid-scroll, thinking it was some sick joke, but the details were too real. The table, the outfits, the faces. It wasn't just a crime, it was a message, and the world read it in real time. David drove straight to Grace Tabernacle. No detours, no hesitation. The same church where he once baptized dozens, where he counseled broken marriages and laid hands on the sick. It stood exactly as he left it. Brick walls, white columns, the cross above the entrance catching the early morning sun. When David arrived at Grace Tabernacle, the doors were unlocked, but this time the pews were empty. No choir, no congregation. No ushers at the door. Just silence. He stood there alone, the hem of his white robe soaked in blood, dripping onto the sanctuary floor. The echo of his footsteps followed him down the aisle, every step a reminder of what he'd already done. He walked to the pulpit and placed his tripod on the altar, set the camera, pressed record, and then he began. No audience, no one watching. In real time. Just David, his voice, and his God. The sermon was called When God is Left Out. He opened his Bible, still stained with red, and read with a voice that cracked under the weight of rage and grief. He quoted verses about betrayal, about broken covenants, about wrath, and what happens when a man is forgotten. He spoke of family, how it was designed to mirror heaven, how disobedience once turned paradise into exile, how silence can be louder than any scream. He laughed in moments, then stood still for long stretches. He wept mid-sentence, then whispered, prayers that sounded more like confessions. 12 minutes. 12 minutes of preaching to a room that once followed his every word, now just echoes and blood. And when the final verse left his lips, he closed the Bible. David stepped down from the pulpit, walked slowly to the baptismal font, the same water where he once baptized strangers, friends, his own children. Still wearing the robe, still covered in blood, he climbed in, lowered himself beneath the surface. No fanfare, no words, just stillness. The water turned red. He stayed under for a moment, then rose, soaking wet, silent. He stood in the center of the sanctuary, arms hanging at his sides. Then he looked up at the cross above the altar and raised both hands. I led them in life, he said. I led them in death. They're with him now. Outside, the sirens drew closer. Inside, David Cole closed his eyes and waited. No resistance, no struggle. Just a quiet end to the loudest sermon he ever preached. The trial of David Cole became more than a courtroom proceeding. It became a national storm. Cameras swarmed the courthouse. News vans lined the streets. Commentators, pastors, psychologists, and legal analysts all weighed in. Inside the courtroom, the tension was unbearable. On one side, former church members, neighbors, and distant relatives who claimed David had always been a man of God, but had lost everything. On the other, survivors, child advocates, abuse experts, and the families of Maria and Daniel who demanded justice without sympathy. The courtroom was divided. Some said David was sick, mentally broken by the collapse of his family and faith. Others said he was cold, calculated, fully aware of every single decision he made that day. Expert witnesses were brought in. One described his behavior as classic narcissistic collapse, a man so dependent on control that losing it felt like death. Another called it religious psychosis, born from years of delusion where David believed he was not just a servant of God but his equal. His mother was called to testify. She declined. She didn't say why. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't visit David once. The internet exploded. Many believed he was pushed to the edge. Some said, no excuse, he's a monster. Others questioned. Why was he even still preaching after the divorce? The image he posted, still etched into memory, became one of the most disturbing photos to circulate in modern true crime history. Platforms took it down within hours, but screenshots flooded. Message boards, podcasts, and late-night interviews. The jury took less than 2 hours to decide. David Cole was sentenced to life in prison. No chance of parole, no chance of re-entry, no chance of rewriting the story. Grace Tabernacle Church sealed the baptismal font with concrete 6 days after. The sentencing, the altar was stripped, the pulpit was removed, the sanctuary was repainted, though no color could erase what happened there. For a man who once baptized hundreds, he would now drown in the silence of his own cell. The town of Huntsville would never be the same. The echoes of what happened inside that home and inside that church didn't fade with time. They settled into the walls, into conversations, into the hearts of people who once trusted David Cole to lead them. Former members of Grace Tabernacle came forward, some through quiet interviews, others through trembling voices on podcasts and local news. They spoke of sermons that felt too heavy, moments they dismissed, warnings they ignored. A few admitted. They saw signs, but didn't know how to respond to a man they had called pastor for over a decade. Maria's closest friends, women who once sang beside her in the choir, launched a fund in her name, the Maria Cole Foundation for Women's Safety. Daniel's family released a written statement. No press conference, no interviews, just one powerful message. He was a good man, a patient father, and he did not deserve to die for loving someone who had already suffered enough. Their statement ended with 2 words: "We forgive." Jacob, Chloe, and Noah's elementary school held a candlelight vigil 2 weeks after the tragedy. Teachers cried. Students asked questions their parents couldn't answer. In the back of the school garden, beneath a tree they once played under, a memorial was planted. 3 stones, 3 names, 1 message: you are still loved. But online, the grief took a different form. The Easter photo, distorted, screenshotted, reposted, never truly disappeared. It still surfaces in forums, still haunts threads on crime pages, still shocks those who see it for the first time. It became a symbol of something too painful to explain and too real to forget. And so, every spring, when families gather, when churches fill with flowers, when children run across lawns hunting for eggs, Huntsville remembers something else. They remember the moment a celebration of life turned into a monument of death. Not because of a stranger, not because of a monster, hiding in the shadows, but because of a man they once trusted, a man they followed, a man who could not let go. Every spring, when the world celebrates life, one town remembers death at the hands of a man who COULDN. Single quotes to. David Cole knew the scriptures. He could quote them backwards. He could move a crowd. He could baptize with authority. But what happens when the words no longer serve the truth? When ego masquerades as righteousness? Even the sacred can become deadly. So we ask, how far would you go to reclaim a life you believe you deserve? How long would you hold on to control disguised as love? Can a man who once saved others be saved himself? Was this avoidable, or was this the consequence of silence, denial, and unchecked control? How many people saw the warning signs but said nothing? How many chose peace over truth? How many waited for someone else to speak up until it was too late? This isn't just a story about one man. It's a story about what we ignore, about what we tolerate in the name of respect, or status, or fear. If you or someone you know is experiencing emotional or spiritual abuse, speak up. There's still time to break the silence. Story 5. The pastor's shadow to the outside world. He was everything a man of God should be: respected, admired, obeyed. Families trusted him with their hearts, their souls, their deepest secrets. But behind closed doors, in the quiet of his own home, those same virtues twisted into something else, something no one was willing to see. A wife caught between fear and faith, wondering when her silence would cost too much. A daughter trapped in a nightmare she never asked for, waiting for someone, anyone, to save her. But no one came. And one night, when the prayers stopped working, when the fear turned to rage, the only way out was through him. What really happened inside that house? What makes a girl just 16 take matters into her own hands? And how does a man praised by so many fall so far without anyone noticing? This is not just a story about a crime. It's about the kind of secrets that sit quietly until they explode, about trust shattered and innocence stolen. Stay with us, because once the truth comes out, there's no turning back. They called him a man of purpose, a man sent from above, born to guide, born to lead. Pastor Aaron Stone didn't just preach sermons. He delivered commands wrapped in scripture. At 44 years old, he stood taller than most, his presence filling any room before he even spoke a word. When he entered Grace Temple Baptist Church, people stood, some in awe, some in fear, but all in respect. He wasn't just a preacher. He was a force, the kind that didn't ask for loyalty. He expected it. It hadn't always been that way. Years ago, the church was nothing more than a small storefront on Cypress Avenue, struggling to stay open. Just a few rows of old wooden pews, a creaky piano, and a handful of faithful souls who believed in something better. Aaron believed too, but not just in faith. He believed in power, and in just over a decade, he turned that tiny chapel into a sanctuary of 2,000 stained glass windows, a grand pulpit, a choir that filled the air with voices that could make you cry. They said it was a blessing. They said he was chosen. They didn't know the price. His sermons were fiery, filled with warnings about sin, about temptation, about keeping your house in order. People came from every part of Willowdale, dressed in their Sunday best, hoping to be seen, hoping to be saved, and Aaron knew exactly what to give them. He visited the sick, gave to the poor, stood at the front of every cause that made the news. If there was a need, Aaron was there at least. That's what they thought. But at home, it was different. At home, there were no crowds, no one to impress. Only his wife, Clara, and their daughter, Mia. Clara Stone was 40, a woman raised on hard truths and harder prayers. Her grandmother taught her early that a good wife stands behind her husband, no matter what, and Clara did. She smiled when she was supposed to, spoke when spoken to, and never, ever questioned Aaron in public. Married at just 19, she had spent over half her life following the man everyone admired. She knew how to keep quiet. She had learned her days were simple: church, home, and tomorrow. That was enough for her. It had to be. Mia, their only child, was 15, full of life, full of dreams. She sang in the choir, loved to draw, spent hours in her room sketching scenes from the Bible, scenes from her imagination, scenes she never dared to share. Her world was small, but it was hers, and at the center of it was her father. To Mia, Aaron wasn't just her dad, he was everything. He made her feel special, protected, loved. She never questioned the rules, the curfews, the way he seemed to always know where she was, who she talked to, what she thought. He said it was because he cared, because he wanted what was best for her, and she believed him. Clara used to have friends from her Bible study group, women who would stop by after service sometimes, just to sit and talk over coffee. One by one, those visits ended. Aaron told her they were distractions, that a woman's place was with her husband, that too many voices could lead her astray. She believed him. She wanted to be good. But the house got quieter and lonelier. Phone calls from her cousin down in Mississippi short, cold, almost forced. Aaron didn't like her family. He said they didn't live right, said they didn't understand the kind of life God expected from them. After a while, Helen stopped answering. Letters from her childhood friend, unopened, left in the drawer. Visits from neighbors were met with polite smiles at the door, but never invitations to come inside. What happens in this house stays in this house. That was the rule, one that Aaron repeated often, especially when things didn't go his way, and things were changing. Mia was 12 when the night prayers began. At first, they didn't seem strange. A father praying with his daughter before bed, reading scripture, laying hands to bless and protect. But as the nights passed, the prayers got longer, the doors were locked, the lights dimmed, and his hands lingered. Mia didn't understand it. She trusted him. He was her father. He said God wanted her to be pure, to be close to him, that this was how she would stay safe from the evils of the world. She believed him because no one had ever told her not to. Clara noticed. She always noticed. One night, she walked past Mia's room. The door was cracked just enough. She stopped. She looked inside, and what she saw froze her in place. His hand, resting too long, too low. Mia, eyes closed, whispering along with his words. And for a moment, just a moment, Clara thought about opening that door. She thought about speaking, but she didn't. She turned away, her hands clenched, her breath tight, and she walked back down the hall. The next morning, nothing was said. The house was quiet. Breakfast was made. Aaron left for church, and Clara cleaned the kitchen like always. But something had changed. That evening, Clara waited until Mia went to sleep. She stood by the kitchen sink, her fingers gripping the edge, staring out the window into the dark. When Aaron came in, she didn't turn, she asked him. Low, careful, if he thought the prayers were too much, if Mia was too old for all that now. He didn't answer, not right away. Then he walked over, slow, deliberate, and stood behind her. The slap came fast. Her lips split. The taste of blood filled her mouth. She stumbled, caught herself on the counter, tears burning her eyes. He leaned close, his voice calm. Don't question me again. That night, Clara learned something she had always feared. Obedience wasn't just expected, it was required. She told herself it was just once, that he was stressed, tired, maybe she had misunderstood what she saw. But deep down, she knew. And from that night on, the house felt colder, the walls thicker, the silence heavier. Aaron didn't need to hit her again. He didn't need to raise his voice. He had made his point. Mia's world continued, wrapped in prayers that didn't feel right, bound by love that didn't protect. And Clara watched, because when fear lives in your home, it changes you. And in this house, fear had become the ruler. The church was alive every Sunday morning. Parking lots full, families dressed in their best, voices lifted in songs of praise. At the center of it all stood Pastor Aaron Stone, the man they believed was chosen, the man they followed without question. His words were powerful, his presence commanding. People leaned in when he spoke, taking in every sentence like it was sent from above. Deacon Samuel Miller, a man who had been with the church since the beginning, often stood beside Aaron after service, smiling proudly. Anointed leadership, he'd say over and over. That's what we got right here. A man sent to lead us through these troubled times. No one questioned it. Why would they? Aaron had built this church from the ground up. He gave, he led, he inspired. And when he spoke of keeping your house in order, of obedience, of sacrifice, people nodded. They trusted him. But inside his own house, the cost of that obedience was growing heavier. Clara sat in the pews every Sunday, silent eyes cast down, hands folded tight. She smiled when people greeted her, nodded when they asked about Mia, but inside, she was unraveling. The guilt didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, in the quiet moments when the house was still and her thoughts too loud to ignore. She started writing it down. needing somewhere to put what she couldn't say. A hidden journal tucked behind the loose panel in the back of her closet. Each night after Erin went to bed, she would write the dates, the times, the way Mia flinched when he walked in the room, the way she cried softly, thinking no one could hear her. Clara heard everything, and now she wrote it down. She couldn't save herself, but could she save her daughter? The journal became her only voice, the only place where the truth could exist. She told herself that one day someone would read it, that one day it would matter. Meanwhile, Mia was slipping. At school, the bright, lively girl everyone knew began to fade. Her grades fell. Her smile disappeared. Teachers noticed. Friends drifted away. She kept to herself, head down, hands always clutching the sleeves of her sweater, even when it was warm outside. But one teacher, Miss Evelyn Reed, saw more. She had seen it before, in other children, in other homes. She tried to reach out, to talk gently, carefully. Mia barely spoke, just nodded, eyes wide, as if afraid to say too much. Ms. Reed called the house one evening, just to check in. Erin answered. The next day, Ms. Reed came to school quiet. She never asked again. No one did. Some moments passed by unnoticed, slipping into memory without leaving a mark. But there are nights that stay frozen in time, heavy with the weight of choices made, words spoken, lives changed forever. This was one of those nights for Clara. The fear had sat with her too long, tightening around her every breath, every thought. She had endured in silence, prayed for strength, begged for mercy, but mercy never came. And as the days blurred together, a slow burning anger began to take its place. She could no longer ignore the way Mia's eyes stayed on the floor, the way her voice had shrunk to barely a whisper. She could no longer lie to herself about what was happening under her roof. She had stayed for her daughter. Now she would speak for her. The rain started in the late afternoon. By nightfall, it was a storm, the kind that shakes the windows and rattles your bones. In the kitchen, the lights flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Clara stood at the stove, stirring a pot she had no intention of serving. Behind her, Aaron sat at the table, flipping pages in his Bible, the air thick between them. She didn't know how to start, but she couldn't wait any longer. Her voice was low at first, almost as if she was testing her own courage. I can't do this anymore, Aaron. I'm going to tell. I'm going to tell the church, the press, and the police. Everybody. He looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing. The calm that always sat on his face didn't waver, but something colder moved in behind it. He set the Bible down, folded his hands, and spoke just above a whisper. You'll never speak again. Clara stepped back, her heart racing, her mind screaming for her to run, but her feet didn't move. He stood, took a slow step forward. She backed into the counter, gripping the edge like it could hold her up. And then it happened. He grabbed her by the arm, yanked her forward. She struggled, pushing against him, trying to scream, but his hand was already at her throat, tight, crushing. Her nails scratched at his skin, desperate, wild, but he didn't stop. Her world narrowed, the kitchen spinning around her, the smell of rain and sweat, the sound of thunder crashing outside, and then nothing. When her body went limp, he held on a moment longer, just to be sure. Then he let go. She crumpled to the floor, eyes still open, her mouth slightly parted, like she had one more thing to say. He stood there, chest rising and falling, looking down at what he had done, not with regret, but with cold calculation. He had come too far. He had too much to lose. It didn't take him long to decide what to do next. He dragged her body to their bedroom, pulled the sheets from their bed, and wrapped her in them with practiced precision. It wasn't the first time he had controlled the situation, but it would be the last. Carrying her through the back door, He moved quickly, using the storm as cover. The church grounds were empty. The old storage room, long abandoned, was perfect. He dug until the earth gave way, and when he was done, he stood in the rain, looking at the ground as if it had always been that way. By dawn, the house was clean. The sheets were gone, and so was Clara. At church, people asked about her absence. Aaron smiled, shaking his head. She went to Georgia. Her aunt's sick. She'll be back soon. They nodded. They prayed. They believed. But upstairs, in her room, Mia sat still, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes wide, her ears still ringing from the sounds of the night before. She had heard the voices, the struggle, the silence. She had heard her mother die. She didn't cry. Not yet. She waited. Because now it was just her, and she knew her time was running out. After Clara's death, the house was quieter than ever. But the silence wasn't peace. It was control. Aaron no longer pretended. There was no one left to see, no one to stop him. What little softness he once showed, Mia disappeared, replaced by something sharper, something colder. He told her her mother had left, that she didn't care about them anymore, that she had chosen someone else, somewhere else. But Mia knew. She had heard the truth with her own ears, and now she lived with it, every day. Aaron's violence became the new routine. He locked her in her room whenever he left the house, like a prisoner. The door, once left ajar for comfort, was now bolted shut, her phone taken, her window nailed. He controlled when she ate, when she spoke, when she slept. There was no more school, no more church, no more pretending. But in his effort to control her, he made one mistake. He thought fear would keep her silent. Mia didn't scream anymore. She didn't cry. She watched. She waited. And inside her, something was changing. The fear that once paralyzed her began to shift into something else. It wasn't rage. It wasn't hate. It was resolve. One morning, while Aaron was outside, Mia slipped into the kitchen. Her hands moved quickly, but steady. She knew where he kept the knives. She found one sharp clean. She wrapped it in an old towel and took it back to her room, tucking it beneath her pillow. Every night after, she slept with her hand resting. Just above it, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready, ready for the night he would come again. And that night came. The storm had passed, but the air was still thick, still heavy, the kind of night where you could hear every creak, every breath. Mia sat on her bed, her eyes open, staring at the door. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, slow, familiar, the sound of the lock clicking open. The door swung in, just like before. Aaron stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. This had become routine. He took off his jacket, his shirt. He was about to sexually assault her again, his eyes on her the entire time. But this time, something was different. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. And when he stepped closer, she reached beneath the pillow. In one motion, sharp, fast, she pulled the knife and drove it into his neck. He stumbled, eyes wide, blood pouring from the wound, his hands grasping at the air, at her, at anything. He tried to speak, but no words came, only a gurgle, a choke. He fell to his knees. She stood watching, breathing heavy but steady. He reached out one last time and then collapsed to the floor. It was over. The silence returned, but this time it was hers. Mia stepped over his body, walked out of the room, down the stairs, into the kitchen. She picked up the phone. Her hands shook as she dialed 911. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, barely above a whisper. "I need help. I killed my father." The operator asked for her name. Mia Stone. The operator asked what happened. He killed my mother. I couldn't let him do it to me too. She sat on the floor, the phone still pressed to her ear, waiting for the sound of sirens, waiting for it to be real. And for the first time in years, she wasn't waiting in fear. She was waiting for freedom. When the police arrived, the house was still. The rain had dried, but the air hung heavy, thick with something they couldn't yet name. The front door was ajar. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no forced entry. Inside, they found Mia sitting on the floor of the living room, her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, her eyes blank, her hands resting on her lap. The knife she used lay on the floor beside her, clean now, but it didn't need to be. The damage was done. The officers moved cautiously, stepping around the quiet, through the hallway, up the stairs. And there he was, Aaron Stone, lifeless, lying in a pool of his own blood. The same man they'd seen preaching just days ago, now cold, his eyes open, frozen in disbelief. They called for backup, secured the scene, took photographs, collected evidence, followed every protocol. But the more they looked, the more one thing became clear. There was no break-in, there was no intruder. Whatever happened here, it came from inside. Mia didn't resist. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for a lawyer. When they asked her what happened, she spoke softly, clearly. I killed my father. He killed my mother. He was going to kill me too. They didn't know what to believe at first. It didn't make sense. This was Pastor Aaron Stone, a man known by the entire community, respected, revered. They needed more. They took Mia into custody, placed her in a holding room, gave her water, waited. But she said nothing else then, in a search of the house. One of the officers found it. A journal hidden behind a panel in Clara's closet. The pages worn, the ink smudged from trembling hands, but the words clear. Every detail, every date, every night. Clara had written it all down. And suddenly, the truth wasn't a question anymore. The news of Aaron's death spread quickly. By morning, the church parking lot was full, not with joy, not with faith, but with confusion, whispers, tears. Deacon Samuel Miller, standing outside. The church steps, shook his head, disbelief written across his face. He was a man of God, he cried. This can't be true. But the truth was no longer hidden. Police revealed parts of the journal, Mia's statement, the abuse, the lies, the murder of Clara Stone. People who had once praised Aaron now stood silent, unable to understand how they hadn't seen it, how they missed the signs, how they trusted him. And as the church struggled with the truth, Mia faced her own reckoning. In court, she sat before the judge, small, fragile, but unwavering. She told everything, the years of pain, the fear, the night her mother died, the night she decided it had to end. There were no lawyers trying to twist the story, no witnesses trying to change the facts, only Mia speaking the truth she had held for too long. The judge listened, the courtroom silent. And when it was over, the sentence came: juvenile detention, manslaughter. Time to be served until she turned 21. Some called it mercy, some called it justice. But for Mia, it was just the beginning of something she had never known before. A life that, for the first time, might finally be hers. Mia lost her childhood. Every smile, every song, every moment that should have belonged to her was taken. Not in an instant, but piece by piece, over years, behind doors no one dared to open. She was never just a daughter, never just a child. She was made into a prisoner, forced to live by rules written in fear. And when there was no one left to protect her, no one left to hear her cries, she made a choice no child should ever have to make. Clara lost her life. She lived in silence, hoping her prayers would one day be answered. hoping that staying quiet would keep her daughter safe. But silence did not save her. Silence buried her. And now her story is one told through pages stained with the truth. She was too afraid to speak. Truth she left behind in the hope that someone, someday, would read it and understand. A church lost its way. They followed a man, not knowing the cost. They believed in his words, trusted his voice, and in doing so, never saw the pain right in front of them. They looked up to him when they should have looked closer, and now they are left with questions. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep. And until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.